Welcome to the realm of hot takes. The opinions are bold, and the confidence even bolder. Here we will dive into the most outrageous assertions, the most unhinged opinions, and the most polemical positions. Prepare yourself.
In celebration of hitting 10,000 subscribers, and as a better way to connect with you all, the viewers, I asked people to share their hot takes and ask some questions about philosophy, the channel, me, or whatever. And I got a lot of responses, some especially spicy. And I do mean a lot. There were so many hot takes and comments that the script ended up being way too long. So I split it up. This video is purely hot takes, and soon the Q&A portion will be uploaded. As cliche as it is, I want to thank everyone who has subscribed, liked, commented, hate commented, or whatever to any of my videos. It's insane that there are over 10,000 people, 12,000 at this point because of how slow I am, and that all of you gave and have continued to give my videos your time and effort, and that means a lot to me. It's more amazing than I could ever imagine. So to honor that, I'm here to give your deepest, darkest philosophical opinions the spotlight, and fully dissect them. First, I want to thank everyone who submitted a hot take. It's scary to put your opinion up to public scrutiny like this, so let's give them all a round of applause. As a warning, I took all of these very seriously, out of respect for you, the viewers, and the topics themselves. In a lot of cases, I disagreed, and that meant sometimes I went to great length, and I tried to be very clear about why I disagreed. For me, that's how philosophical discussion should work. You agree or disagree, but you always do it respectfully and clearly. I've tried to provide quotes where relevant, especially since these are all pretty much mini essays for each opinion. These are all just my own arguments, and they're meant as a way to connect with you, not as the final word. I'm not claiming to be an expert on anything here at all. What I say lives or dies purely on the strength of my own arguments, rather than some quality of authority that I mystically possess. And if I disagree with you, it's never meant as a personal attack. I cannot stress this enough. Don't forget that, as I tear your opinions to shreds. And of course, I fully intend for there to be replies in the comments. So, with all of that said, sit back, enjoy the gameplay, and I hope you enjoy this video.
Hot takes.
The first comes from Marcus and Doom, who says,
Taxation is theft.
Thank you for the hot take. Now let's dig into this. Taxation is theft is a pretty common libertarian idea that I'm sure we have all heard before. It makes intuitive sense, too. Like, I earned that money doing hard work, so why should the government, who I may not even support, come in and take it? So I get the intuition behind this statement for sure, and I think it hits at a fundamental feeling we all have as a private citizen. Personally, I don't believe taxation is theft, and am willing to give a lot of my money to support my fellow citizens, but all I'll offer here is a counter-argument against the categorical nature of the statement, taxation is theft. I'll argue that even in hardline libertarian positions, minimal government taxation is still warranted, and I'll be drawing partially from philosophers Thomas Nagel and Liam Murphy, by presenting their argument first, then critiquing it and adding some flavor. Whether you're a strict adherent to property rights, or a strong believer that market outcomes are inherently linked to your own contribution, and thus you get what you deserve, or some combination of the two, these both find that government taxation is some parasitic infringement on whatever property you've accumulated, or the value you are responsible for. The problem with this idea is that it invokes responsibility. Basically, these libertarian positions are structured around the idea that you deserve wealth in correspondence with the value that you are responsible for. Now obviously, this has immediate problems when one considers anything luck-based that influences the distribution of goods, like genetics. But there is a more fundamental problem than that. Murphy and Nagel argue that markets require a government or some similar governing body to exist. One can think of the state of nature as a situation without at least a minimal ordering presence, or underground markets, where you're lucky if you don't get consistently scammed. And further, the specific iteration of the market depends on the kinds of policies that the government pursues in structuring the market. The greatest lie that capitalism tells is that it is the natural economic system. This is just simply not true. Generously, it may be the most intuitive, but that doesn't mean it's metaphysically natural. And market systems, according to Murphy and Nagel, require a government to structure them and maintain them. Think of patents. It seems natural and intuitive that whoever came up with some idea or invented some product should be owed every single cent of the market revenue for their idea. But this can only happen due to government protection of the idea. Otherwise, anybody with the resources and drive would instantly copy the idea, and there would be just a flood of copycats. And don't even get me started on copyright and royalties and intellectual property and whatnot. Patents, property rights, enforcement of contracts, stock exchanges, banks, police protection of private property, all of these depend on some order to exist, some legal system that is supported by taxation. And because the government is the force behind this legal system, they are therefore inherently, but partially, responsible for any value produced in the market they create. And thus, under even the strongest forms of libertarianism, it seems like one cannot categorically claim that taxation is theft. Maybe particular instances of it are, but not as a whole. So, in summary, Murphy and Nagel argue that because markets require a government to exist, every single cent that you make, in part, is due to the government's maintenance and interference. And thus, they also have a claim of responsibility over the revenue, and taxation can be warranted. That is basically Murphy and Nagel's argument. Now, there is a conceptual flaw here. They are very absolutist when they claim that markets cannot exist without the government. For them, it is nearly a logical necessity, but this is obviously not true. Two-person exchanges can easily happen without a government. Now, this is mostly a theoretical flaw. Like, in some abstract sense, not every dollar exchanged requires the government. But as all of us currently live, there is nary a cent that is made without the government's inherent responsibility in constructing and maintaining and enforcing the market. And I don't think we can ignore the fact that if you think taxation is theft, this is undermined somewhat by the fact that you choose to live in any given country and consume governmental resources, like roads and protection by the military and whatnot. It's not absolutely free, since no country is without taxation, so you can't really escape it, but there is a sense, even a small one, in which you are allowing a particular government to take your money. I should also briefly mention that the libertarian conception of private property accumulation assumes free transactions with absolutely no spillovers. But there's an entire economic theory on negative and positive externalities, where taxes or subsidies, called Pigouvian after Arthur Pigou, are warranted. Now, despite my disagreement, again, none of this says to what degree people should be taxed. At the very least, the above argument only means that the government can tax for the minimal services it offers by maintaining the market. And there are, of course, instances where a government can be seen as illegitimate, or are collecting and using tax dollars for nefarious or undemocratic purposes. So there is room for taxation to be seen as theft, but the categorical nature of your hot take is what I think makes it wrong. It's not necessarily true, and I hope that more libertarians will stop using this as a kind of catch-all slogan, as it takes away support for very helpful and what should otherwise be uncontroversial government programs. Regardless, I appreciate your hot take, and I hope my disagreement satisfied you. I'm interested to see what people think in the comments. Stay respectful, please, but I'd love to see some friendly debate.
Verdict: disagree.
The next hot take comes from Metaltown4545, and they say,
I'll take the bait. Nietzsche is overrated.
I appreciate you taking my bait, though it wasn't really bait, I promise. For context, in my critique of Playground, I specifically said the Nietzsche line as an example of a philosophy hot take. Now, as for Nietzsche's overratedness, whether or not that's true is debatable, and is honestly a really hard question to answer because it could go either way. I think I understand why people think Nietzsche is overrated. Like, yes, Nietzsche's writing is filled with iconoclastic, startling, and interesting philosophical positions. But the man was also capable of aggressively stupid ideas too. Read any of his writing on women, for example. And I think that many people get a faulty view of Nietzsche from the internet. The presentation of him online is almost worship-like, and then when people actually try and read him, they see his confusing style, his self-contradiction, frequent lack of rigor, and they're that much more likely to dismiss him entirely. And even personally, I've got some issues with the man. Some of his critiques, especially the aphoristic ones, are overly polemical and stray directly into strawman territory, if he even tries to actually engage with the idea. Sometimes he just writes stuff off as spiritual weakness, like philosophical skepticism, which is very hard to take seriously if you're above the age of 15. So, without knowing exactly why you think Nietzsche is overrated, I definitely could understand why in general. On the other hand, I have a lot of respect for Nietzsche because he genuinely did anticipate so much of the continental philosophical landscape following his life. You can often see seeds of future writers in Nietzsche's own writing, which is really cool. He genuinely does have an aphorism or short essay that can be referenced in nearly every occasion. I also think Thus Spoke Zarathustra is a fantastic book, both in practice and as a concept of being a kind of modern myth, and it's fun to ruminate on the many puzzles within. I also tend to enjoy his pragmatic aphoristic style, because it affords a lot of flexibility, and as a thinker on nihilism, Nietzsche is probably unmatched. My favorite thing about Nietzsche, which probably goes both for and against the charge that he's overrated, is how he is interpreted and discussed by his successors. Nietzsche's writing is often seen as a kind of toolkit that explains the disjointed nature of his ideas, and even his self-contradiction. You kind of pick up one of his aphorisms or ideas, test it out, see how you like it, and drop it if it doesn't resonate with you. Because of this, other philosophers often refer to Nietzsche and reinterpret his writing under their own lenses, and being familiar with Nietzsche can thus provide a key insight into these later thinkers. Reading about how Bresir, Deleuze, Heidegger, and others have utilized Nietzsche, understood him, critiqued him, and whatnot is genuinely fascinating. The dude wrote so much on so many different topics, and took so many different argumentative angles. Some of what he wrote I agree with, some I disagree with, and seeing what other philosophers pick up on and how they interpret his sayings goes a long way to show the range of interpretation allowable. So I think I understand why Nietzsche is seen as overrated by some, definitely. I don't find this to be true, but my only real pushback will be that being acquainted with Nietzsche's actual ideas, whether or not you agree with him, can be very useful for further philosophical exploration because of the way he influenced people after him. Anyways, thank you for the hot take.
Verdict? Disagree, kind of, but I understand.
Okay, the next hot take, or lukewarm take, is from Lester Pester 525. They say,
maybe it's a hot take, maybe lukewarm. Humanity won't reach a utopian future, whether it be technological advancement or a regression to simpler times. We have been, / will always be standing in our own way because we're a competitive mammalian species. There are billions of territorial apes occupying densely packed and often poorly managed communities, and we will never collectively agree on enough things to fully overcome that.
Okay. Guys, I hate to be a doomer, but I think I pretty much agree with Lester Pester 525's lukewarm take, though I see some wrinkles to it. Things like climate change, for example, can really only be solved as a global community, and increasingly so, it seems like literally nothing meaningful will be done. We've got people like Vladimir Putin starting wars and genocides, and that just makes it seem even less likely that any kind of positive collective action will ever be genuinely taken on an actual project like stopping global warming. I'll offer something even further than this comment by saying that maybe it's possible that some society internally will be seen as utopian by its citizens. I'm imagining some of the visions we hear from Silicon Valley AI worshippers. I don't agree with these, but let's say for the sake of example that one locally develops. The problem with this is that, like Ursula K. Le Guin's story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, where a utopian society internally depends on the misery of a single child, these utopian visions will likely depend upon the subjugation, suffering, coercion, and neglect of other communities and peoples who aren't able to access the utopia. This immediately calls into question its utopian status, if it's defined by the misery of others. I'll return to climate change. Let's say the US is able to basically invent technology to where it can survive the effects of climate change without stopping it, and has magically solved all of its social problems as well. Like, global warming continues, but the US is able to thrive through it, achieving a kind of internal utopia. Even then, we couldn't call this utopia because the only reason global warming is happening is because of the past actions of nations like the US. And who are the worst recipients of the negative effects of global warming? The developing world. They overwhelmingly don't see the benefits of industrialization and are disproportionately affected by its negative consequences. So even if we could solve our great problems, it's very, very, very likely that other communities will not be able to do so, and thus we couldn't call the community that solves its problems a utopia. So yeah, I'm also unfortunately pessimistic in this regard, like the commenter. And I should say that my reply is totally consistent with theirs. I just wanted to expand upon an internal angle from their position. Also, I would love to hear some hope in the comments if anybody wants to push back. Anyways, thank you for the hot or lukewarm take. I appreciate it.
Verdict: agree.
The next hot take comes from Panflute Skeleton.
My hot take is the book I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Iain Reid was absolute garbage, despite how popular it was back in 2016 or 2017. Read like someone took Philosophy 101 and decided that was enough to be an expert.
So your comment was the only one where I saw the book recommendation and I was able to read it for the video. And I also wanted to discuss it since the comment is a hot take. I'd been interested in this book for a while, so I picked it up. And honestly, I was very prepared to enjoy the book and offer some respectful disagreement like I've been trying to offer in other places. I was hoping that I'd see something redemptive in it. And I will say this, it has good prose, and the concept is, I guess, cool. But for everyone who enjoys that my critiques are in good faith and are always level-headed, I am so sorry to let you down because I fully agree with this commenter. This book actually rage-baited me. Every single page made me more and more angry. Now, I need to clarify that while I won't spoil the book here or offer any crazy deep literary critique, I did already know the book's big twist from a Jacob Geller video years ago, so I did not have the mystery and thriller elements that might have otherwise made the book entertaining to other readers. From what I can tell, a lot of the discourse around this book is heavily motivated by the book's big reveal that, leaves your jaw on the floor because it's like, so totally mind-blowing, dude. Even though if you pay attention to the book's symbolism and completely unsubtle dialogue, they really broadcast the twist from miles away. And I mean, really, that's kind of what I'm Thinking of Ending Things does. It basically beats you over the head with its themes and its little hints, and even its red herrings, so that by the time the twist comes, there's no crazy recontextualization or reinterpretation of the book. It's just a slightly more visible broadcast of the same basic idea. But regardless of me knowing the book's twist, dear God, is this commenter onto something with the Philosophy 101 take. Now, to be very, very clear, and I'm sure this commenter, do not think that Philosophy 101 ideas are stupid or cringe. In fact, in many ways, the ideas you'll encounter in an introductory class are likely some of the most interesting and salient in the entire field. These are the ideas that people first grapple with, and they're designed to introduce students to the basic ideas of further philosophical fields and just make them interested in the discipline. The issue with this book is that it's incredibly smug and narcissistic about its themes, and doesn't admit of any intelligence on the reader's part. It condescendingly holds the reader's hand through topics that they will not need help with. I think there are two good comparisons I can make. The first is Sophie's World, which is a teaching novel I read early on in my philosophical journey. Surprisingly, it actually has a kind of similar plot to I'm Thinking of Ending Things, but regardless. They both cover the same Philosophy 101 ideas. In fact, I'm Thinking of Ending Things is way, way simpler. But the difference is that Sophie's World is very clear about its intent and target audience. You're only going to read that book if you're unfamiliar with the concepts, whereas I'm Thinking of Ending Things narcissistically assumes that between itself and the reader, it will always be the smarter of the two. Another comparison I can make is to Notes from Underground by Dostoevsky. Both of these books are shamelessly introspective novels from male narcissists, and are absolute torture to read as a result. But the difference is that Notes from Underground aligns the reader against the narrator. Dostoevsky writes the underground man in a way that makes it clear he is not to be taken seriously, whereas I'm Thinking of Ending Things tries to force this tragic sense of identification with its completely unlikable protagonist. Basically, the book just comes off as extremely smug about very, very basic ideas, and I think we've all met people that are like that. Now, I basically just spoiled the book despite promising I wouldn't, and I'm sorry if you really wanted to read it. I don't know. Go read The Alchemist instead. That book is just as in love with itself, but at least it's shorter and slightly less intellectually offensive. Anyways, I hope that this commenter is satisfied with my agreement with their hot take, and I hope people who like this book aren't too offended by what I said. It's totally valid to like the book. This was just my own experience, and I'm deliberately being over the top.
Verdict. Strongly agree.
And our final hot take comes from Josh Moffat Robert, and he says,
Hume's attack on miracles refutes empiricism more than religion. LOL, if testimony can't justify belief, then no empirical science based on shared observation is safe. Also, Nietzsche's critique of Stoicism fails because he didn't understand Stoicism.
Alright, we got 2 hot takes here, so thank you for the double dose of heat. I'll reply to these in sequence, starting with the David Hume one. I'm gonna preface by saying that I disagree with both of these statements, and I'll try to be very, very clear why. And I want to say that my disagreement is meant in the utmost respect for this commenter, and that I greatly appreciate them engaging with my channel. I love discussing these ideas, and I look forward to their replies. For those who aren't familiar with Hume, I would highly recommend watching my 3 videos on him. I never actually covered his argument against miracles, except for a brief, very uncharitable mention in my miracles video, but those other videos outline Hume's highly skeptical position that I can't restate fully here. I will give a brief summary of Hume's argument against miracles, focusing only on the main thrust of the argument. Basically, Hume thinks that we base our beliefs entirely on sensory experience, and a miracle is, by definition, something that goes against the most uniform, universal experience we have, that being the regularity of nature, like the laws of physics. We only ever experience consistent physical regularities, and a miracle is something that purportedly goes against them, and is usually a singular instance and is reported only by hearsay. So when people testify that a miracle occurred, you have conflicting sets of experience. There's your overwhelming universal experience of unbreaking physical regularity, and the limited evidence coming from a few witnesses. And any belief in the second one would be coming from a less universal belief that people's words are reliable. Obviously, just from this presentation, it seems like we probably shouldn't believe the miracle, especially considering that religious claims are generally full of bias and vested interests. But Hume does offer a condition for accepting a miraculous claim. He says that we should accept the miracle if it would be more miraculous for the testimony to be false than for the event to have happened. Quote, "No testimony is sufficient to establish a miracle, unless the testimony be of such a kind that its falsehood would be more miraculous." An example would be, let's say everyone on Earth, except for you, saw a giant portal open in the sky, with a huge Cthulhu tentacle coming through, and then it went away. Since you missed it, you're choosing whether or not you want to believe it happened. In this case, it's probably more likely that what everyone claims happened truly did happen, rather than everyone spontaneously deciding to lie to you, or everyone randomly sharing the same hallucination. But generally, Hume argues, this will almost never be the case, since the evidence for miracles is generally so flimsy, and it's always way more possible that the testimony is false. So that's basically Hume's argument against miracles. Now we can come to the commenter's position, which as a reminder was this.
Hume's attack on miracles refutes empiricism more than religion. LOL, if testimony can't justify belief, then no empirical science based on shared observation is safe.
Again, to be fair up front, While I think the commenter's hot take is wrong, I definitely get why they would say this. Hume's skepticism is powerful, and if you read him and aren't nervous about empiricism afterwards, you probably didn't understand the force of his arguments properly. If Hume is right, no belief drawn from experience will ever be certain. But that's just on certainty. Hume's arguments concerning miracles and empiricism are about probabilistic belief, and that is where I end up disagreeing. They claim that this argument actually pertains more to empiricism and scientific shared testimony, since no shared testimony is safe. But I think given the above argument, this isn't the case. Hume isn't saying testimony doesn't ever justify belief. Hume is saying that in the particular case of miracles, our general experience is so uniform and the evidence for the miracle so singular and faulty that it won't be warranted to believe the miracle. Empirical science has internal structures that make it largely resistant to the charges that Hume makes against miracles. It has a heavy emphasis on reproducibility, the minimization of vested interests and biases, peer review, and generally has technology and further empirical results derived from its findings. Every time your phone works, it's basically more and more testimony, or quote-unquote proof, that empirical science is doing something right. And if we apply Hume's standard for accepting miracles to empirical testimony in the sciences by thinking whether it's more miraculous for science's results to be true, or whether all of its shared testimonial results are wrong, I think it's clear that in almost no way is it more likely that all the results in science are based on lies, and that the technology we routinely use that depends on scientific empirical results to work is actually not working. If anything, Hume's argument doesn't undermine empirical science, it actually explains why empiricism is so careful and relies on independent confirmation and repeatability and successful prediction. Miraculous claims generally rely on singular, completely unrepeatable claims that always stand out as very strange when you try to integrate them into a web of belief. But scientific empirical claims usually integrate without causing too much displacement, though that isn't always true, of course. Empirical science, as the commenter points out, relies on testimony, but Hume never argues against testimony per se, only in the specific miraculous arena. In the sciences, our experience of testimony being true is generally uniform, not so with miracles. But I should say that Hume's arguments do undermine scientific claims of universal, stable natural laws, not by claiming they can't exist, but by claiming we can't be certain they do exist. All we can do is formalize regularities and patterns that we see. Empiricism is no more and no less than that. Now let's turn to the commenter's hot take about Stoicism and Nietzsche. As a reminder, their hot take was this.
Also, Nietzsche's critique of Stoicism fails because he didn't understand Stoicism.
So Nietzsche has critiqued Stoicism a couple times, as far as I'm aware. The main one is in Beyond Good and Evil, when he critiques the Stoic intention to live according to nature, by saying that this intention is flawed since it imagines nature according to Stoic ideals. Stoics create a Stoic image of nature, they universalize their own principles, and then claim that they want to live according to this image of nature that they've posited, which is a blatantly circular position. Quote, "Your pride wants to dictate and annex your morals and ideals onto nature. Yes, nature itself. You demand that it be nature according to Stoa, and you want to make all existence exist in your own image alone, as a huge eternal glorification and universalization of Stoicism. What happened back then with the Stoics still happens today, just as soon as a philosophy begins believing in itself. It always creates the world in its own image. It cannot do otherwise. Philosophy is this tyrannical drive itself, the most spiritual will to power, to the creation of the world, to the causa prima." Nietzsche also critiques the Stoics briefly in The Gay Science, but that critique is very indirect. I'm assuming the commenter is referring to this specific passage, though this is where I would love it if the commenter would add some extra context for how he thinks Nietzsche misunderstands Stoicism, because in my reading of both, and from what I know of current scholarship, it seems like Nietzsche's critique actually comes from understanding that there is a deep ideological difference between himself and the Stoics, not from a misunderstanding. Stoicism operates under a teleological view of the world. They saw it as rationally ordered by a divine intelligence, what Marcus Aurelius called the Logos. Here's a quote from ancient historian of philosophy Diogenes Laertius when he discusses the Stoics. "Living in agreement with nature comes to be the end, which is in accordance with the nature of oneself and that of the whole. Engaging in no activity wont to be forbidden by the universal law, which is the right reason pervading everything and identical to Zeus, who is this director of the administration of existing things." So the Stoics implicitly understood the nature that they would live in agreement with to be governed rationally and morally. For Nietzsche, an anti-essentialist, anti-teleological thinker, and moral skeptic, this Stoic conception of nature was definitely just a projection of human concerns onto what is essentially a chaotic, ungoverned cosmos, where anything resembling morality isn't the effect of a divine intelligence, but is merely human will to power manifesting in a specific way. Now, whether or not Nietzsche is right is up to the commenter to believe in, and it's totally valid to think that the Stoics are right and that Nietzsche is wrong. But it isn't clear to me that Nietzsche's critique derives from a misunderstanding. If anything, I think he did understand Stoicism, likely at a deeper level than most of us ever will. And I think this because of one of Nietzsche's most useful tools that particularly resonated with me, which comes from Beyond Good and Evil. Here is the quote. "Actually, to explain how the strangest metaphysical claims of a philosopher really come about, it is always good and wise to begin by asking, what morality is he getting at?" For Nietzsche, if you want to understand a philosophical metaphysical system, especially one that ends up making strange, counterintuitive claims, one should consider the moral underpinnings or aims. Under this view, you can critique Schopenhauer's pessimism, Heidegger's nostalgia, and of course, Stoicism's natural principles. Nietzsche understands that metaphysics always creates the world in its own image. It cannot do otherwise. Philosophy is this tyrannical drive itself, the most spiritual will to power. Again, I would love if this commenter would add some extra context, because I am genuinely interested in where they're coming from, but under my own research, I have to disagree. I think Nietzsche does understand Stoicism, and that this critique is just from a deep difference between the two, not from a misunderstanding. But I want to reiterate that I'm thankful to this commenter for engaging with my channel and for thinking deeply about these philosophers, and that goes for everybody here. This is how philosophy gets done, after all. Okay, that ends the hot takes and the responses. I hope you enjoyed the video. The second portion will be up later this week. I'm going to keep this outro short because I'm really tired. I hope it was fun. Thank you for watching. Click like, click subscribe, look forward to the next. Enjoy the holidays. Peace. Have a nice day.